help build a consensus around what are the kinds of norms, what are the kinds of institutional supports, what are the kinds of funding mechanisms that are needed to really enable countries and communities to deal with the impacts of climate mobility and climate change. And I'm really pleased to have a cross-regional panel with me today to explore this issue. I'll start from my far left. We have with us the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment of Fiji, Dr. Sivendra Michael. Thank you for joining us. Next to me, Dr. Geoffrey Sabiti from the IGAD ICPAC. To my right, Ms. Carolina Moreno from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to the CARICOM. And to my far right, Mr. Hatim Aznaq from the Union of the Mediterranean. I'm very pleased to have this cross section of perspectives, and I would like to start with a rapid fire round of just from 1 to 5. How important do you think it is to have common regional frameworks, agreements around this issue on climate mobility? 5 is it's really important to have that. 1 would be not very important.
For a region that is on the front lines of climate change, it will definitely be 5, because this is not an issue of tomorrow. This is an issue of now for us.
Yeah, so I think the reason why we are all here is to recognize the importance of this kind of collaborations and frameworks. So I'll give it 5, because at least we know that there is no other option but to be resilient and build systems that can withstand the recurrent shocks. So 5.
Yeah, in the Caribbean, of course, it's also very important. So, of course, we will give it a 5 too. I think the good thing about the Caribbean is that we have suffered a lot from hurricanes, tropical storms, that everybody is very aware of that. So everybody is very worried about that. So like the relevance of this is very clear for everyone, and that makes things easier.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. This is the first time that I'm speaking in one of the events of the Climate Mobility Center. You have a very great team that is working and operating behind this pavilion and behind the center. What I want to say that I'm coming from an intergovernmental organization that is working in the heart of this topic. And also I am coming from a region that is witnessing multiplier crisis. So when you are talking about climate mobility or those safe pathways, you are talking about the Mediterranean, where we have the migration corridors, including due to moving because there is flows, there is risks, there is natural hazards, there is a lot. And there is conflicts. So people between the dilemma of conflicts and of moving because the natural hazards. So I think this regional dimension or having this need to be translated into mechanisms. How those mechanisms can work, I will answer later.
So which number do you give? Also 5?
If you give me the limit of 5, I will say more than that, but I will give 5. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody says regional cooperation, very important. Now, what, again, 5 to 1, how far along would you say is your region in actually making regional cooperation on this issue happen? And we'll get into longer answers, but again, like just rapid fire round.
So again, ranking is quite difficult because this is more of a discussion that takes place at the center of the region. So for the Pacific, this discussion didn't start, just last year, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. It started decades ago, right? We had the Boe Declaration that came out from the Pacific Leaders Meeting. After the Boe Declaration, there came about frameworks. And one of the frameworks that there is in the Pacific, it's called the Pacific Climate Mobility Framework that was developed in the spirit of trying to find ways in which we are relocating communities, but also more importantly, the other human security, other kind of nuxes that exist on the issues of climate mobility. One thing that my fellow panelist has just mentioned is the understanding of what climate mobility means in the context of each of our regions. So it's not only permanent relocation, it can be also induced displacement, which is caused by one flash flood. And this can happen for small island states, which is home to 10,000 people, 20,000 people, means the whole country can be displaced. So it's quite a sensitive topic. Yes, it is. This is the situation in the region, and so for Fiji as a country of its own, in our national capacity, I would say three is where I will rank us. We have the Climate Change Act, but more importantly, we are the first country in the world to have a planned relocation guideline 2018. And after we had the planned relocation guideline, we came about developing a standard operating procedure on planned relocation, which means how do we move? How did we get there? That's important. In 2012, we had our first relocation. No framework, no policy. So all the learnings from that time was integrated to develop a guideline. Still not good enough. So then we did a SOP to move, look at each of the sectors. So currently, two other chapters that we are working on is cultural heritage, because when you do climate mobility, you have to think of aspects of cultural heritage. And the other one, very important for human rights, is children. When we move children, they have a different level of impact altogether and so forth. So as I speak right now, this is our back home, our first relocation that is happening to communities that is using the standard operating procedure on planned relocation, which is Nambavatu and Dongea. Before that, six relocations, we have no kind of policy framework. So still getting there, not perfect, but in due time, I think these are the guidance instruments or policy instruments that will really help us get there. So I'll say three.
So thank you very much for the question. As far as the IGAD region is concerned, even from the onset of its establishment, and IGAD is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, one of the Africa Union Commission, Regional Economic Commission. So IGAD was created early in the 80s because of the intensity and severity of droughts that happened in the region. Of course, the region is also more than 60% arid to semi-arid lands, and it is pretty an area where there are agro-pastoral communities whose livelihood is livestock. So with that, I think it has always been the option for communities who are affected by both water and pasture shortage to move across. Recently, IGAD has worked on what is called the IGAD protocol on free movement, and also the IGAD transhumance protocol that outlines standards and provides a framework within which the movements across the member countries within cross-border areas and even more interior, in terms of also the internally displaced persons. And of course, this is a region also that is an epitome of both political and other socio-economic instabilities. So these two protocols are meant to help in terms of providing guidelines for member countries to see how they can coordinate human mobility, but also understand that this is now heightened by the increasing stress from climate change, climate extremes, and also due to other pressures like environmental degradation and population increase. So with that kind of framework, there is now at least a discussion that can help in terms of dignifying those who are moving, but also having a coordinated plan with clear transhumance routes that can help guide in case of either drought or other natural and human-made calamities. And of course, this comes with a lot of conflict and insecurity. So in terms of the roadmap, I think I see that we are not far from uh, maybe reaching where we want, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of domestication of some of these protocols and frameworks. So I'll stick it to a 3 because there are challenges. There are still barriers to full implementation of some of these protocols, but there's a lot of information still that is needed to be brought on board for evidence-based kind of decision-making across the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, in the Caribbean, first I would like to explain that we have 2 different organizations that contains the different countries in the Caribbean. One is the CARICOM, which is the Caribbean community, which includes all the countries in the English-speaking Caribbean and Suriname, and Haiti. But then you have also the organization of the Eastern Caribbean states, which is a smaller group of countries. But these 2 organizations are very important for all the regional coordination of these mechanisms. In that sense, I believe in the Caribbean we are maybe in 2.5 around this path, because we already have the organization of the Eastern Caribbean states make a document that is the first Caribbean document in recognizing the problem of the climate mobility. And this declaration is the Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change that was in 2023, but that needs to be now translated into guidelines and things that I am listening that the Pacific have already moved on that direction, which is very good, because that means we will call their doors when we are doing our guidelines for that. But as he was explaining for the Pacific, even when these guidelines are not there, the good thing is that in practice, when we have had major situations like major hurricanes and situations like that are, putting in danger the situation of people in mobility due to climate change, the Caribbean authorities have found ad hoc mechanisms too, in addition to the ones that we already have. Because in CARICOM, you have, in the organization of the Eastern Caribbean state, you have free movement. And with CARICOM countries, there are a lot of countries that also have free movement. But when we have had major hurricanes that requires relocation, they have put in place ad hoc mechanisms for guaranteeing the education, health, and other rights for people that are moving, and this has been very, very interesting, and later I will talk more about some examples of that.
Thank you. For me, it's not a philosophical answer, especially it comes after this COP, or this event specifically comes after our meeting in Berlin, where we had the climate, the summit that the Climate Mobility organized in Berlin. And I do remember that there is a question that's still with me: who is responsible in terms of institutions about the climate mobility in our region? And this always leads me to ask how we can identify or translate this into our national policies in the Mediterranean. We have within the Union for the Mediterranean the platforms where we meet our member states, we organize with them, we discuss with them, but on a technical level where we discuss mitigation, adaptation. But climate mobility goes beyond that, touching climate mobility, the adaptation and mitigation, how people can adapt, how people cannot move, what kind of accessibility we will give them, what kind of regions. And this leads me to the idea that we cannot talk about something that we cannot measure. So how climate mobility we can measure it? What is the data that we have within the Mediterranean that will allow the institutions to work effectively on the climate mobility? That's to answer your question. I give again 5 because we need to measure. We need to understand who our counterparts in the national levels that can work clearly on the climate mobility as a portfolio within that process. The other elements, I think our regions should move from the reactivity side to a proactive process. How we can be proactive, how we can be prepared to the kind of the move displacement people will face in our region. If I'm talking about today about our region in Morocco, for example, in Tangier or some places that are touching both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. So where is the next destination? So what I'm saying here is shared risks and shared destiny. This is what I will end with.
Thank you. And it's really interesting because you've all spoken to what exists already. And what comes out very clearly, I think, is that the types of movement and what is happening are, of course, there's similarities, but there's also quite clear distinctions. In the Pacific, we're really looking at, the prospect of people having to permanently relocate from their homes. You were saying in the IGAD region, in the Horn of Africa, there's actually a long tradition of pastoral movement, and mobility is kind of normal, but it's being affected by climate change. So how do you manage the changing patterns of people moving and potential conflicts with settled communities? And then in the Caribbean, we're dealing a lot with these sudden onset disasters that displace people, but then usually there's return until the next disaster happens, and the region has responded flexibly. And I think in the Mediterranean, we have a situation where, again, like we have actually quite long-standing migration routes, many of them contentious, right? Like with a lot of political complications around them also. And so you have now this element of climate coming into an already existing complicated migration system. So given that diversity, I would like to see how much do you see your region looking towards other regions? How much do you have, when you looked at your own frameworks, was that a kind of bottom-up process, kind of from the ground up, seeing like what do we need, or did you also look out and see what are others doing?
Both. Bottom up in the sense, as I said, 2012 we did our first relocation. So all the learnings, and it was not perfect. Relocations are very difficult process. So yes, definitely bottom up, and then also looking outside is very important, given that things like data measurement and so forth is important. But I disagree with the comment that you cannot you cannot talk about what you cannot measure, because this whole aspect of cultural identity, movement of cultures, you can never measure that. You can never put a dollar value. You could never put an economic value. You could never even measure the number of graveyards that needs to move. So it's very culturally sensitive. So we have a lot of other, I mean, for the Pacific it goes way back, because we had migration back in the days where we have other islands like Tuvaluans that are living in an island in Fiji called Kiowa. We have people from Kiribati that are living in an island called Rambi. And so then it becomes constitutional as well as what democracy exists and so forth, because you still have to have voting rights from where you come from, but you also have to be given some rights and privileges to do the same in the home country or the host country. These are very complex issues, so we have to look outside. And so right now, where we are at is we are doing the Pacific regional mobility by looking out and other regions like Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and trying to understand like what would be the implementation strategy for that. And inward looking is from the learnings. I wouldn't say that any relocation for us has been easy, particularly those related to climate events. And Mika is part of our team that goes out to do community vulnerability risk assessment. So we have about 43 communities that apply to want to relocate. We do this assessment to try and understand what we can relocate. So yes, aspect of measurement is there, but it's not like wholesome for us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I think from the perspectives of the IGAN region, mobility has been looked at as a means of adaptation and treating movement as a legitimate planned response to climate and disaster risks has been the drive of what we do. And with this, we have been working with the framework which recognizes, enables, and uh, protects that mobility that happens. And as I've said, over the years, this has been the custom. So what we need is to develop tools, but also learn from other regions and also countries learning from other countries in terms of how to support the decision on mobility. And with this, we have invested quite heavily on the early warning systems. And these early warning systems, where IGAD has a number of regional institutions, and the regional institution mandated for this is the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. So with this institution and the fact that we have recognized that anticipation can help reduce the kind of crisis, but also the resources, the financial resources needed to respond to disasters, we have embarked on the process of addressing anticipatory action. And then we have developed what is called a roadmap for anticipatory action, which we believe is, together with other existing initiatives, is going to help early action when information is provided in terms of which areas are going to be affected, which agricultural lands are going to be affected, and also working with humanitarian agencies. We want to ensure that we minimize the level of humanitarian need that, according to statistics, is the highest globally. So we want to use that approach of early warning for anticipatory action. And I can tell you that over the years now, we have been promoting co-production of climate information, but also advisories that can help not just in terms of minimizing risks, but also helping communities to become more sustainable and resilient to the shocks. So the recent intervention that we have undertaken has been sponsored by the German government through the GIZ. It has helped in terms of developing customized early warning system that guides in terms of preparation of preparedness and action plans when droughts have been anticipated. So this is still in pilot, but it is helping in terms of making sure that the communities are sensitized about the impending risks, and then they are able to plan, but together with other actors, whether it is governments or CBOs, communities have been supported in terms of how to manage the scarce water and pasture. So they remain sustainable in that sense and are able to build the resilience against the recurring impacts. So the journey is still ongoing because most of the time we are providing climate information, but there is need for usable climate information, and this means we need to move from the traditional weather information to kind of impact-based that can be a rationale for investments, but also the stakeholders and donors buying into the the funding windows that might be required to drive the preparedness and resilience across areas. So there are some good practices there, and these are being scaled out to other regions. So I mentioned the Karamoja cluster that has about 4 countries, but now there are also other clusters like Moyale. Moyale cluster is the border between Ethiopia and Kenya, but also Mandela cluster. So we are scaling these good practices up to ensure that more communities can be covered with this information and be able to respond in time, or at least to have a guided way of maintaining their flocks and water and pasture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think that speaks to, if we look at the Pacific, we, I think, have a fairly strong, and you may contradict me, but I think we have a fairly strong political consensus around this issue. So the framework was really built around a common political understanding between countries. And you're speaking now very strongly to the, like, how can regional institutions move capacity forward at the regional level, whether there is already political consensus or not, right? Like certain capacities and capabilities can be moved forward. And I would like to turn to our colleagues from the Caribbean and the Mediterranean for your reflection on, what do you see moving forward at the political level? And if the political kind of fostering agreement on these issues is more complicated, where do you see the kind of technical capacity coming from regional institutions, maybe making a difference and moving the needle along as political consensus is being built?
Yes, we believe that in the Caribbean, at least there is like now we were working together with IOM, with the International Organization of Migration, for determining what were the main challenges that we were having in the Caribbean for having more data related to human mobility. Because in the discussion we were having here, it's like, even when you have a lot of impacts that are no economic loss, those impacts needs to be visibilized, and for that you need data. It doesn't mean that the data has to be about economic aspect, but you have to be able to visibilize exactly what is the loss and what is the situation and what are the needs. And in that sense, some of the outcome of that diagnosis of what is needed for having more a regional approach to data on human mobility, the lack of gender, for example, and disaggregated data is something that is missing in the region, but also there is like incompatibility on the way that different countries are producing the data. So we are working now through the CARICOM group for statistics on how to build something that works for everyone, because for you to be able to have a regional data, the data need to be standardized in a format that works for everyone. But also, going to your question, something that came out is the lack of sufficient knowledge and capacity in the countries at the level of statisticians for working on this. Because remember that the countries in the Caribbean, some of these countries, you have St. Kitts and Nevis with the whole country is only 42,000 people. So how many people do you have in these countries that have like all the capacities that are needed? So I think regional support on that and intra-regional support on that can also help on that regard. And I believe that there is the political willingness. Also, this information, that the only political concerns that are there is like that the use of this information doesn't create political issues for the country, because of course you will be able to visit to see a lot of information, demographic information about people. So that's also come with a responsibility on security and privacy of the data. So I will leave it there now, but we can continue the discussion.
Thank you so much. this idea of subcategorization of the regions is very important because it allows us to create some regional models that we can apply in different regions. But the point that I want to touch here is not only about measuring data. Identity cannot be measured. What I'm saying, to take a clear decisions, I need as a decision maker some data that help me to identify which path I am taking. Now we are talking about safe pathways for those people. My question is, protecting those people or act before and anticipate the risk that can happen on this region? That's what I want to do. I want to make sure those people cannot be displaced because of this hazard. What I'm saying here, and is documented, only last year we have 45.8 million people displaced only in 1 year. Can you imagine this number? What I'm saying here, we need to be prepared. We need to react to the hazards that are happening and how we can empower those people. My region, if I'm talking from an institutional point of view as a UFM, we are trying to understand that the climate mobility is not anymore a south-south point, it's a north-south also, because we have the north also is bearing the consequences of climate change. What happened in Spain last year from floods, how shared this solidarity of communities in Valencia, in different regions, and also in Morocco, in Libya, in different regions. So this is not anymore, there is no immune community. This is touching everyone. So how can this regional cooperation can be translated into a frameworks? Do we have the regional framework on climate mobility? Do we have the national declarations that categorize and introduce the climate mobility as standpoint vision? This is the question. So how through us, and we do understand that. I'm not saying we are not doing that, but we are trying to move forward to make it a comprehensive, easy, simplified language to both scientists, policymakers. We have one of the bodies of scientists is MEDIC telling us that the Mediterranean is 20% warming and faster than the global regions. This kind of information help and push decision makers to understand that the urgency comes to the table. What I want to conclude here, that we need to think in an innovative way. There is no any more time to the classic decision-making processes. We need to be innovative. What kind of solutions financially we can support the climate mobility? What is the framework what we have? How the regional institutions can help through the UFM? We are saying that we are engaged with the Global Center for Climate Mobility to have this shared knowledge, understanding that the climate mobility is not only about saying to people, we know that you are vulnerable. No, we want to tell them, we give you the tools and the resources to protect yourself and to act before having the natural hazards. This is the message. But how we can do that? We need partners, ministries, we need member states that our efforts is limited to create dialogue and push and create this ministerial mandate. But our colleagues at the ministries, they can translate that, but they cannot do that themselves. We need to mobilize multilateral development banks. We need to bring private sector. We have with us today, one of our projects that we work with them is the MedBank Toolkit. That is a toolkit to support young people to create projects in their places on energy, to understand the laws. Until today, there is some regions we cannot understand even the legal framework. So how I can protect or empower those people about climate mobility? Understanding the local level can shape this climate mobility regional shared knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think actually the Pacific framework does exactly cover this whole spectrum of like, how do we anticipate and enable people to not be displaced? How do we deal with displacement? So maybe if I can ask a last question, because I understand the PS needs to leave for the negotiations. What do you think, is the potential to act together at the regional level and address this issue? And what really needs to be done across regions globally? Where are the limits of regional cooperation?
What needs to be done is exactly what our colleagues have said. We need to work together and demonstrate this South-South learning, try and capitalize on what works best, what does not work, and try and adapt to that. But behind all of this, one of the biggest things is, as you mentioned, is resource mobilization, support mobilization, because no one government can do it alone. And although it's your own people, we need that compact understanding amongst each other. We need the different UN agencies that have the different mandates to play their role and support in the facilitation, whether it's human rights, whether it's UNICEF, to understand how or what offerings and tools that they have to support their targeted audience and so forth. So solidarity is a big part of it. Political will, um, it's always been there. It's always taken its shapes and forms. But I think beyond political will, we need like a good mobilization strategy and implementation strategy to get things moving in the way it's supposed to happen. And for that, every stakeholder has to play its part. Yeah, we have to be all of it together. We need to sit around the same table, look each other eye to eye, and ask what you can do, offer what you can do. If you cannot do it, then you ask for the assistance.
Yeah, so I think for us as the IGAD region to move forward, we will need to work very closely across the different member states. What is needed, most important, I think, is improving our evidence base, both data systems, our ability to anticipate these risks, but also to coordinate both vertically and horizontally with all the different stakeholders to ensure that there is capacity to at least increase the resources available, possibly during the potentially good seasons, work on issues to do with the environmental degradation, and also in terms of the productive sectors, we need to be learning what has happened in possibly the Asian countries or the European countries in terms of increasing productivity using technologies, and where one region like Eastern Africa might be ahead in terms of some systems, protocols, and regulations, there should be an aspect of learning. What is also missing is the issue of monitoring and tracking progress, because in most of the countries, there is limited capacity to collect and manage data. So you don't have kind of rationale, even when it comes to advocating for financing from private sector, but also from international financing mechanisms. So what we need also is to ensure that there are systems that can monitor and also document baselines. Success stories have to be documented and shared, and also there has to be rigorous effort in terms of capacitating what we call, either you will call it the first mile or the last mile, because mostly we are having all these discussions either at international forums like COP, regional forums, but when it comes to the people who are affected the most, the engagement is not as strong. Also, there's the issue of the mindset change, where communities have to be sensitized, and it should be an adaptive approach where when people are being advised either to relocate or to undertake certain activities, they have community level buy-in that can help improve things at that level. Having said that, I think there are lots of international standards or procedures, including data that Africa and different regions in Africa need to take care of. Issues to do with environmental monitoring, predictive capacities, ICPAC is already working with, for example, the universities and the global institutions in the north to ensure that the issue I talked about of impact-based forecasting, and also we need a lot of data in terms of risk profiling. These are things where we need to collaborate with either the South-South or the North-South to ensure that there is adequate evidence, but also the understanding and buy-in of the local communities needs to increase. And I think lastly is the issue of financing, because good plans that cannot be funded cannot solve the problem. So we need to create partnerships that can increase the amount of financing available to invest in climate proofing our infrastructure, investing in our agriculture systems, and also upgrade our infrastructure to ensure that whatever shocks that come, at least they do not make the situation worse than it was. And lastly is the issue of investing heavily on what we can call durable solutions, because whereas mobility is being legitimized, you need to deal with the root causes of mobility. But even where those people go, I think they create a lot of sometimes conflict that need to be solved by investing in either nature-based solutions or other potential solutions that have worked elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wonder, you mentioned the challenge of, having these regional initiatives for improving early warning, for example, improving climate risk information, really trickle down to communities, and then also get feedback, right? Like get an assessment or monitoring of, well, how well has this worked, or how much is this being taken up and adopted. And I wonder if there are mechanisms in the Caribbean or also in the Mediterranean where, beyond having kind of this intergovernmental conversation on these issues, do you see venues, fora, where other stakeholders, more grassroots stakeholders, are coming together and are also shaping this conversation in your regions? And how could that be potentially also supported and encouraged?
Yes, and that connects with the question you made before about what is needed for getting this done. And I think the first thing that we will say as the Human Rights Office, of course, is that a human rights-based approach needs to be incorporated to the discussion. And what that means in practice, it includes one of the pillars of that human rights-based approach, and I believe is maybe one of the most important one, is the participation pillar. Because the thing is, all these plans and all these regulations and all these mechanisms have to put people that are affected in the center of these discussions. And something we have seen is that, okay, we did consultations, and they do consultations one day, later they don't get any feedback sometimes, or even if they are consulted, the idea is we are asking for more than that. It's more than that. They need to be part of these mechanisms. They need to be part of the decision-making process in the whole spectrum. But also the solutions. Also, they are the people that know more what things can work better for them and what it won't work. It cannot be only professional people that study the subject that take the decisions. In fact, we are asking for the opposite, putting more people affected in the decision-making positions, so this can have like a huge impact. But also these mechanisms have to be diverse. It have to have young people. You have to have, as he was saying, there are a lot of children affected too, and they are the ones that need to say how this will be impacted. Also, put the free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous people and for communities. What we have seen in the Caribbean is like indigenous people organizations are claiming their spaces on this. You can see, for example, Belize is a country that have in the region the best practices about how to include the participation of indigenous communities. Um, and in Bahamas and other places, there have been consultations and trying to include the voices, but also I imagine it's the same for the Pacific, but in the Caribbean we have several challenges. For example, Bahamas is a country that has 700 islands. Of course, maybe 20 something of them are occupied, are having people living there. But the thing is that also approaching to these communities requires a lot of costs, a lot of logistics. So we need to think also on the funding part, how we will fund this, how we will use also innovative ways for including the participation of these people. So for us, this is very important, and the prevention part, because human mobility due to climate, there is a part that of course we cannot prevent, but the way we prepare for these scenarios, it plays a huge role on the amount of people that need to be displaced, because at the end the goal is not to have the less people as possible to be displaced. And this is something that from the human rights perspective we also try to say. We also need to work for the people that live, but also we need to make the possibility for people to stay, and to enable the circumstances for people to stay. In Dominica, after Hurricane Maria in 2017, half of the population had to move, and the schools were closed for more than a year. Health service was not available. I mean, the whole country was shut down. 90% of the infrastructure of the country was damaged. So that required a lot of coordinations, and as the Pacific colleague was also saying, a lot of learning. So now we need to look on those learnings and also the learning of other regions for making the guidelines that works well in this situation.
If it comes to apply this and to answer the question by applying that on the Mediterranean, I can say that the response to the climate mobility is too fragmented and ad hoc. So you don't have something that is institutionalized, that is sustainable, how we can answer to those challenges. What I'm saying here that is we need a right approach, based approach. We need to understand that the response to the climate mobility include dignity, safety, that values of human rights that we need to take into consideration. Because there is that, because and through the explanation of climate mobility, it means people that displaced. But what about other people that decided to stay at those regions? How we can make sure that the assistance and the support will reach those people? I will tell you something very funny, but very important. I was watching TikTok and I saw a video that of one of young people of today in the mountains. He wanted to marry a lady and she decided to decline his invitation because he's living in a region that has no water installed in that region, because she knows that she will be suffering from going to different places to get the water and to bring it. So this is very small story. Maybe it's very normal or stupid, but how this touch our societies, how this go beyond something that just related to people leaving from place to place, but people to decide to stay there. What I'm saying here that we need to mobilize. You are talking about stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders that are involved? Is it only the institutions or the ministries, or is it also private sector scientists? I talked in the beginning about simplifying the messages. The messages that we are now sharing or transferring to decision makers is a very complicated, I don't want to say tough, but complicated messages. Climate mobility, it means people moved. What is the international agreement that is translating that? Can people be introduced as a climate migrant or no? So these things need to be injected in our daily life by saying those people need to have a dignity, the way how we are dealing with them. And I'm saying again, today from what happened in different conflicts in the region, passing by Gaza. We are thinking now in different perspectives. It's not a matter only of thinking about a normal ad hoc topic. It needs to be something that can be translated in early warning systems. What kind of solutions we are giving them, what toolkit the people displaced we can provide them with. This kind of simplified messages or simplified questions, we need to think about it. Mobilizing finance is a very important question. We do have one of the best practices in the Mediterranean called the Blue Partnership to mobilize private sector institutions to invest in poor in some institutions. How we can do something similar in the climate mobility, how we can bring the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, how we can bring other stakeholders to the Mediterranean region to think. And here, why I'm saying, Sarah and your team, you are very great, because you are bringing something that can be even not big, pilot that we can do in our region. We can showcase to the decision makers that we have something we can catalyze. We can use it as a starting point. We are aiming higher, but we need to start with something concrete. Let's draft something. Let's have something on the table that we can present to our decision makers. When my boss, my secretary general telling me, Hatem, what means the climate mobility? How we can do something about it? I can tell him we have 1, 2, 3. We can do this. So here I can say this is a global center for the climate mobility, and you are having some very concrete case studies, and you are promoting them as a humanitarian case studies. I like that. Let's make that a message that everyone can understand, from private sector, from banks, from young people, and here I do recommend us, salute your efforts in bringing youth fellowship. This is very good because we do have also youth groups, but how inject these values into the next generation? Maybe some people very tired from this discussion of the next generation, the future is tomorrow. But what I'm saying today is if we don't share the discussion with them in the moment that there is AI, there is a lot, TikTok. And this is remind me of something also funny, that I meet with a group of farmers in one of the regions, and they told them, let's modernize, let's use the technology in your agriculture. Don't use only the traditional agriculture. They told me, no, we don't know how to use the technology. When we finished the discussion, they are watching TikTok. So I was saying, how they are this controversial discussion. They don't know how to bring the technology, but they do use some applications. This is, I think, we need to change this mindset. We need to have a shared narrative that climate mobility goes beyond responding to the natural hazards. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing your team to do this efforts.
Thank you, Hatim. And I think that is very much an ongoing work in progress, right? Like, I think we started this center very much with this idea of like, we need to create a common language for a phenomenon that had many different even terms to describe it, right? Like, we did not have a common terminology. We're starting to build that common terminology, but I agree with you, there's still a lot of translation work to be done, right? And we're still learning from the different regions and partners about, you know, how are people actually talking about this on the ground? Like, people who are experiencing this, what is their terminology, right? Like, how do they understand what's happening to them? But also, as you said, like when we talk to development banks, how do we frame this so it fits into what they're trying to do, right? So you really need to have a vocabulary that resonates with different audiences. And I agree with you that that's very much part of the ongoing work that needs to happen, while we're also, I think, driving these very concrete practical solutions like early warning systems, improving climate information, making sure we have better participatory processes, right? Like, there are a lot of kind of practical things that we know already can be done better and where their learnings can be shared, while also really building a better understanding of what it is that we're trying to get done within regions and across regions. Thank you. I think we're at time. This was great panel, and I would like to thank you all for your time and contributions, and I hope we can continue the conversation in future forums. Thank you so much.